Is it time for England's eligibility rules to change? Should you have to play in England in order to play for England? This has been asked a lot lately, hasn't it? And I'm going to ask it again because the CEO of the RFU, Bill Sweeney, has said in an interview yesterday there's no plans to change the criteria that are currently in place. He says he's not concerned about the number of players going to play in France, and he said the ones that do move are simply making a lifestyle choice. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I think there's a lot of nuance, and I want to put some proper flesh on the bones with this one. But if I had to summarise what my position is, it's that the criteria should change. And there's two reasons for that. First reason is international sport is about the best players of one nationality going up against the best players of another nationality and seeing who wins. That's what international sport is about. So I don't like it when politics or financial stability of a domestic league gets in the way of that pure fundamental of what international sport is or should be. And secondly, rugby is a really dangerous sport that can end with one injury. Players' careers are short. They deserve to earn as much money as they can while they're playing. And bribing them to potentially earn less and stay in one country by the carrot of that national team representation, I just don't like it. So those are my reasons. I understand, though, there's a lot of moving parts here, so let's talk about it. Before we get on to players talking about that won't be available for England next year, that were in the World Cup squad, Owen Farrell and Jack Willis, who's currently at Toulouse, and Henry Arundel at Racing 92. There's Joe Marchant, Dave Ribbons, Manu Tuolangi, and a load more England players moving over, Kyle Sinclair, and a bunch more besides. Before I get to them, let's have a quick journey around the world. In Ireland, you have to play in Ireland to play for Ireland. Difference being, their wages are supplemented by the IRFU. And also there are very, very favourable tax breaks for Irish players playing in Ireland, which means I think I'm right in saying that the players don't really miss out. There's also not salary caps in place for the provinces or anything like that. So I think the players get compensated competitively compared to what they would get elsewhere. New Zealand, you have to play in New Zealand to play for New Zealand. Again, the difference there is Super Rugby, the season there is quite short. So it's possible with the international windows and everything for players to go and play a short season in Japan and still play for the national team, earn a bucket load of cash and then come back home, as is the case with Ardi Savia this year. France, I don't actually know officially what the criteria is. I think you have to play in France to play for France. The difference is, and the reason I don't know, is because French players do play in France and they don't go elsewhere because the top 14 and French rugby in general is worth so much cash. They don't need to go anywhere. And then you've got other nations, Australia, Scotland, Wales, South Africa. And some of those countries have eligibility criteria in, a certain number of caps or whatever. But generally speaking, players are available when they go and play abroad. In the case of South Africa, there's no limit. You can play in Japan. Lots of players in the World Cup winning squad did play in Japan, did play in Europe. And that's fine. And the decision on personnel is left to the head coach. And that's what I would like to be the case in England. So I mentioned Owen Farrell a moment ago. Owen Farrell's chosen to go and play in Paris. So he's unavailable for England. I would like him to be available for England. But Steve Borthwick may decide, I'm going to get more access to Marcus Smith, more access to George Ford, more access to Finn Smith. As good as Owen Farrell is, that means I'm not going to pick him. In another position, he may well decide, actually, there's not as many people, I'm going to take the risk on that person. And I think that's how I would have it. By all means, don't pick a player because they play in France because you're not going to get the access or whatever. But that should be left to the head coach. That's how South Africa currently run it. And despite the fact they're moving a load of players back to South Africa at the minute, that's how I would do it nonetheless. And then there are countries like Argentina where there's no professional league to speak of, so players are encouraged to go and play abroad. As for England, what's going on? Well, currently England are moving towards an Ireland, New Zealand type model where the union will pay some of the wages of a chunk of the players. So 25 hybrid contracts are being organised. I think they've been delayed now, so they won't come in until next season. And only 2 of them have been kind of offered so far, but another 23 players will get some sort of contract. And the RFU will be paying for their services a bit. This means Steve Borthwick will get more access to his players. They can dictate to the clubs, I want the player to play in that position, or I want them not to play in that game and play in that game, that sort of thing. And that's very much like the Irish currently have it. I would also say this, on the face of it, that seems like, okay, there's a bit of joined up thinking going on there, and I can go with it. However, the way I would also look at this hybrid deal is what's going on here is the RFU in England are bailing out Premiership clubs who are hemorrhaging money. The recent financial accounts show that the Premiership clubs are living well beyond their means. They cannot afford to pay the players that they are currently paying. They're losing money every year, and there's no sign of that changing. The other element of this, obviously in recent memory, Wasps, London Irish, Worcester went bust. So I think there is definitely a recognition that the Premiership cannot afford the money it's currently spending. The Premiership cannot afford any other clubs to go bust, otherwise the whole house of cards will come falling down. So I think the RFU are just pumping up the bubble a little bit more, chucking money in to subsidise the players. My issue with this, twofold. One, I think the Premiership should get to a point where it's sustainable and can grow organically. I'll talk about France in a minute. But fundamentally, the money's a finite resource, and the RFU, in order to pay the Premiership clubs more money by these hybrid contracts, they have to take money from somewhere. And what's happened is the RFU have taken a load of money away from the second tier of rugby, which is a massively important part of the overall sport in England, I believe. And also they've taken a load of money away from grassroots level, coach development, community officers, a load of the stuff which grows the game at the base. The RFU have just got rid of. And now we see what they're spending it on. They're spending it on the Premiership clubs to keep them inflated, keep the value of the Premiership up. And I get it. I just worry about the long-term effect. When I compare that to France, and there's a lot of England players that are going to France currently and making that lifestyle choice, as Bill Sweeney put it. Strange way to characterise it, but fine, I'll go with him. Actually, I would agree with him that I'm not that concerned about the number of players that are going, or if you change the eligibility criteria, I actually wouldn't be concerned about the number of players that would go, because the one thing England doesn't have to worry about is the number of players it has. It's got a load. But what I do have concerns about is the financial stability of English domestic rugby and these clubs living beyond their means in the Premiership, not able to afford the big contracts that they're currently paying. What do you see when you look at France, who have 3 professional leagues, a massively lucrative TV contract? The gravitational pull of French rugby is just getting bigger and bigger. And they're able to go out and find the best players in the world from other countries. By the way, one of the reasons I don't think it would be a massive issue with loads of English players going there is because, well, firstly, France get to pick, or French clubs get to pick players from all around the world, New Zealand, South Africa, Japan, wherever. So it's not just English players they go and pick, although they will pick some. And they have a GIF system, the quota system, where you have to have a certain number of French developed or French eligible players in a matchday squad. And that means that they're not going to pick loads of English players. They might just pluck a few. So I don't think it would be a massive problem, even if the rules did change. But what's gone on in France over the last 10, 20 years is they've built from the base up, and they've made something sustainable grow organically to the point that professional leagues are growing all the time. And that's what I think England needs to do. What England is currently doing is going down very much an Ireland, New Zealand type model. And those countries have got much smaller populations. They're kind of reliant on an amazing school system, which is brilliant. And this is something which Eddie Jones got a lot of criticism for talking about. Now, I don't agree with everything Eddie Jones said in this interview, but one thing I think he did hit upon is that English rugby is too reliant on a small number of private schools, probably always has been, and it hasn't harnessed the potential of the 60 million people in England, which is a more comparable population with France and a more comparable population with South Africa, where, yes, in South Africa they have an amazing school system, but they have a brilliant grassroots rugby system which builds the base of the pyramid and takes it right up to the top. That's what they've done in France as well, and I think that's what England is currently lacking. That's what I'd like to see them do. Take a long-term view and grow the game organically. What they're actually doing is chucking more money at the top, but by pulling it, I see it, by pulling money out of the bottom. Right, what about these England players then? Is it even a concern about whether about not having these players playing abroad eligible for England? I don't actually think it would affect the national team that much. That's the truth of it. Look at this Foreign Legion team that I've picked. Couldn't actually think of a left winger If there's other players I've missed, let me know in the comments. But Jonathan Joseph, I could have snuck in there. Maybe Marcus Watson. But point being, actually, the bulk of the players you want in the England squad are playing in England at the moment anyway. There are a few that I would take. I'd take Jack Willis in a heartbeat. I'd probably take Dave Ribbons out of that lot as well. Henry Arundel might be in the mix. Joe Marchant definitely would be in the mix. And I'd personally have Owen Farrell. But as I've already mentioned, England aren't short of fly halves. So one of the things that's been said is England don't need to change the eligibility criteria because we've got loads of players. And a lot of people have said, oh, it doesn't matter. Then France won't take that many players anyway. I would actually use that as the argument why you should relax the eligibility criteria. France aren't going to take that many of our players. And secondly, we've got loads of players anyway. And thirdly, and going back to the financial situation, if you've got a league that isn't sustainable and Toulon want to come and pay £500,000 or Racing 92 want to come and pay £1 million for one of your best players, let them. And then you've got all that money back that you can spend on young players, not to mention another spot in another team for an Englishman. And I say for an Englishman because I think that there has to be some compromises here. Okay, we can disagree or agree on whether the eligibility criteria should be changed, but it needs to be joined up, and things are not joined up at the minute. So in the case of these hybrid contracts, so here's the way I would do it. Maro Itoje and Jamie George are the first two people that have been named as getting these hybrid contracts. That means that Saracens are basically going to be given 300 grand to chuck at these two guys. And that's 150 grand each that Saracens don't have to find for their salary. So that's saving them a bit of money. And England get access to them. Thing is, these two guys have played, 10 years in the Premiership? Won it 6 times? Won European Cups? If they've put their time in, if what you want to do is protect the value of the Premiership, these guys have done a shift, let them go off and play and experience something else. Maybe even get better as players by going and playing elsewhere. It might be really good for the national team for Maro Itoje to go and play against some of those giant Frenchmen and get used to it and go and dominate there and then come back and do it on an international pitch as well. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. These guys have done their bit for the Premiership. Maybe 7 years. So there you go. 7 years in the Premiership, then you're allowed to go. And it doesn't affect your national decision. So by that measure, Henry Arundel wouldn't be available. He'd have to come back and put a bit more of a shift in. But Maro Itoje and Jamie George would be available for England if they went off to France. That would seem like quite a fair situation to me. And the other one, and I mentioned by letting Maro Itoje or Jamie George go, it might make a space for an Englishman. I mentioned that because something's got to be done about this. If you want to make the England team better, address some of the issues that are going on in the Premiership at the moment. I've mentioned this before. Inside centre, big problem position for England for quite a long time now. And you look at the Premiership sides, and it is nothing but, or with a couple of exceptions, it is non-English qualified players playing in a 12 jersey. Andre Esterhuizen for Quins, Bernard Janzi van Rensburg for Bristol, Solomon Ikata for Leicester, Moroni or Orlando for Newcastle, Hutchinson for Northampton, Redpath for Bath, Tompkins for Saracens, Hawkins for Exeter. There are a few English players, but there's loads of money being spent. And as we've already established, Premiership clubs do not have a load of it to go around. And they're spending a chunk of it on non-English players, which does not help the national team. So fine, if you're going to have your hybrid contracts and you're going to have your not letting Jack Willis play for England, let's say, also sort this out. Let's have a quota system in. Let's have English qualified minimum standards for a squad. That's how I would see it. At the minute, you're saying you want the national team to be better, and that's why you're spending a load of money on hybrid contracts, and that's why you're saying players can't play from abroad. But then you're also letting all manner of foreign players come in and play in your Premiership clubs. So at least sort this out as well, because currently things are not consistent. And that kind of wraps up my thoughts on the topic. I've gone all sorts of places there. Tell me what you think. Comments down below. And if you've reached this point in the video, you must be a proper rugby nerd like me. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. I'll see you on the next one.